Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm your host, Spratt. I work at Sports Info Solutions, and I'm joined, as always, by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, in preparing for the show, I was reading your playoff odds article over on ESPN, and everyone should definitely check out that article. It's on ESPN Insider. But there were some really interesting topics for discussion that I wanted to borrow for today's podcast. And I wanted to start with the AFC West, where, believe it or not, all four teams have a better than 20% chance of making the playoffs. And I think we should just go through these teams one by one, Aaron, to talk about what your thoughts about them are and what we think their chances are. So let's start at the top with the Broncos. The article listed that they have a 60.2% chance of making the playoffs. And the thing that I found interesting was that their DVOA hasn't really dropped that much the last 2 weeks. They went from 4th overall to 9th, despite two pretty close losses to Atlanta and San Diego. Aaron, in your mind, do you think this team is as strong as you thought they were a few weeks ago?
I think, yeah, because I expected for them to drop a little bit after the hot 4-0 start. I didn't think that team was really, I thought, okay, well, they're better than we thought they were going into this season, but they're not as good as 4-0, and that's actually, that's what we've seen. So the interesting thing about Denver with DVOA is that in DVOA, their games have almost all been very close to average with one exception. Their losses the last 2 weeks have been very close and to good teams, Atlanta being a really good team this year. So all of their games, except for one, have been between minus 15% and plus 20%. The exception is the huge win over Tampa Bay, 27-7 in Week 4. But other than that, they've actually been pretty consistent. So I think it demonstrates that they are, about, a top 10 team, but not necessarily a top 5 team, particularly this year when the NFC seems to be much stronger than the AFC. The defense has improved a little bit over the last couple weeks. The offense has declined a little bit, so now they're kind of closer to what we expected before the season, which is a bad offense. Not as bad as we expected before the season, which is why they're winning.
Right.
And a very good defense, but not as good as last year, because they're 4th in defensive DVOA, with a fairly sizable gap between the top 2 defenses, which are Minnesota and Seattle, and the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think we're definitely on the same page here. Definitely over the last 2 weeks, my general thoughts about this offense have gotten a little worse. You remember I was a big Trevor Siemian fan earlier in the year, but now that they had those 3 27-point-plus wins over the Colts, Bengals, and Bucks, but that Bengals win isn't really looking as impressive anymore. All 3 of those teams are 23rd or worst in defensive DVOA. Last 2 weeks, they haven't scored as much. So, yeah, I think you're right. They're 23rd in offensive DVOA, and that seems right. I think they are a solid but not exceptional team. All right, so the Chiefs, the thing that was interesting here was they're slightly worse with their odds of making the playoffs at 58.3% behind the Broncos at 60.2%. But the fact that they have a 2-0 start in the AFC West, what does that mean for their chances of maybe winning the division outright?
Right, they actually have the strongest chance to win the division because of that 2-0 record in the division. So they are at 37.8% to win the division, while Denver is 34.3%, and Oakland, which is also 4-2 but has not played as well as Denver, Kansas City overall, is at 21.3.
Right. So the Chiefs are 14th in DVOA, but this is the thing that I always find really interesting, especially early in the season, because the Chiefs had that just huge blowout loss to the Steelers. They lost 43-14. The rest of the season, they've got some pretty solid resume numbers there. I mean, they beat the Raiders last week 26-10 as probably their signature win, but they've been very impressive in their other 5 games. How much does that one really big loss affect what the Chiefs are seeing with their DVOA numbers and otherwise?
Well, they're 4 games, which is part of why.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is part of why that game has such an effect, because they've only played 5 games, and that is by far the biggest loss this year by any team. Right now, based on the current opponent adjustments, it's at minus 105%.
Oh,
So not good.
No, not great.
So that's having a huge effect on their rating. There's no question about it. They also had a very big win the week before above the Jets, but that's nowhere near as positive as the loss to the Steelers is negative. So the Kansas City is a better team than people give them credit for, but then again, they were last year.
True.
So it's just kind of the same thing as last year. This team is better than people give them credit for.
I think that's true, and I also think they're about to get even better because Justin Houston has started practicing for the first time this season. He could be back in another week or so. This team has been the number 8 DVOA team without him, and they basically haven't had a pass rush. I mean, I think they're actually last in defensive pressure rate, so that could be a really big difference, and that could sort of put them in the upper echelon of defenses, maybe alongside Denver when he gets healthy and starts making an impact again.
Yeah, I mean, what is sort of this year the second echelon of defenses, Minnesota and Seattle. Like I said, so far, Minnesota and Seattle defensively are there's a big gap between them and the rest of the league. Then comes Arizona, which has the offense has been a problem, but the defense constant, and Denver, which pretty much is the same, except that their quarterback we didn't expect to be good.
Right.
But, I mean, the Kansas City defense is going to get better. This is a team that is definitely in it and, has the benefit of, like, the rest of the AFC West plays an easier schedule this year, although, their easier games have actually already been played because they already got their Houston game out of the way and their Jets game out of the way. So their schedule going forward is 21st in the league, which of the teams in that division is the second easiest. The team with the easiest, is the second hardest.
Right.
San Diego has the easiest remaining schedule by our numbers, and Oakland is the 7th easiest.
So I'm guessing that the schedule for Oakland has a lot to do with their 49.1% chance of making the playoffs because they're only 18th in DVOA overall, which is the worst mark in the division, but that's still a pretty high chance of making the playoffs. They do have a good record, but is this mostly schedule related, or maybe I'm missing something about the quality of the Raiders team?
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders have played all these close games, but the week 3 and 4 they have really nice ratings. Week 5 and 6 they don't have really good ratings. For week 5, when they beat San Diego, they actually have San Diego has the better rating. So San Diego played better on a play-by-play basis, but the various bounces of the ball and everything, Oakland won the game.
That was a weird one.
So, yeah, it's one of those weird ones. And they happen, and, hey, the goal is not to have the best rating. The goal is to win the game. You play to win the game. You don't play
I've heard
to win
that.
DVOA.
Yeah, I think someone famous said that.
Yeah, but Oakland, that defense, I do not know, right? I mean, they sign all those big-name free agents, and the defense is terrible. I think that there's no pass rush opposite Mac. Without Mario Edwards in there, there's just have not found other pass rushers. And Sean Smith has not played up to what we thought that they were going to get out of him. Amerson has actually played pretty well again, if I'm remembering correctly. And while we talk about this, I'm going to check the premium charting data from SIS, from Sports Info Solutions, that's on Football Outsiders. And this is my promotional opportunity.
Yep, definitely subscribe, everyone.
That you can get all kinds of good premium charting tables for $25 for the season on footballoutsiders.com. But if we look at the cornerbacks who've had enough targets to be qualified for our rankings, Sean Smith is 41st in success rate and 54th in yards allowed per pass. So that is not what the Raiders thought they were getting when they signed him. Emerson's actually not that much better. He's 51st in yards allowed per pass. He's better in success rate at 26th. But, they're not getting pass rush on one side. The cornerback coverage hasn't been as good. The linebackers, I mean, we already knew, Ben Heaney was not going to be the star of that defense or anything. So, the defense is a real problem.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, they're 29th in defensive DVOA and 3rd in offense. They basically look more like Atlanta, but with the names on that defense, that's just kind of a shocking outcome. But hey,
yeah, it's definitely they're pretty similar to Atlanta, but the difference between 2nd and 3rd, it's interesting. Like defense, the gap between the top 2 teams and the rest of the league in offense is also very large. The difference between Dallas and Atlanta is less than 1 percentage point. The difference between Atlanta and Oakland is more than 7 percentage points.
Well, I mean, even still, that easy schedule and the fact that they've already banked some wins, that makes it pretty, I guess, about a 50-50 shot that they'll make the playoffs.
Yeah, they're in it, and I really, I've been kind of driving the Baltimore bandwagon, and I'm almost ready to hop off of that thing. And I'm driving the Buffalo bandwagon instead.
Okay, yep.
But nonetheless, it would not be a shock to see 3 AFC West teams in the playoffs, and Baltimore and Buffalo fall short.
Sure. And, I mean, the Chargers are even in it themselves. I guess that's probably a little surprising given the 2-4 record, but they're a strong 13th in overall DVOA, and you have them with a 20.8% chance of making the playoffs. So,
I mean, I think people who've been listening to us and have been reading my site for a while know that by analyzing play-by-play rather than wins and losses, it means that we give much less weight to the team blowing all those late fourth quarter leads than conventional wisdom does. Now, look, I certainly think that's problematic. It's a mixture of horrible luck and bad coaching decisions. And the horrible luck can change, but the bad coaching decisions may not.
Right.
But when you look at the underlying play from San Diego, it has been really strong. It's definitely an above average team. They're in the top half of the league. They're 8th in offense, 12th on defense, 26th on special teams, which is, special teams is where some of these fourth quarter problems have come in.
Sure. And this is sort of a situation where I think publicly people see the injuries to Keenan Allen, Danny Woodhead, these big name skill position players, and they think that could doom their season. But Rivers is playing really well. This offensive line is playing really well. Rivers has only been pressured, basically one of the best 3 teams in allowing pressure for him. So he's having a great season. But I do have a question about the remaining schedule, because your ESPN article mentioned that it was the easiest remaining schedule in the league. But looking at the actual teams involved, I'm not sure if I totally agree with that. So I'll just kind of run through it for the rest of the year. The next 2 weeks are definitely the tough part, at the Falcons and then at the Broncos. Then you have home Titans, home Dolphins, at the Texans, home for the Bucks, at the Panthers, home for the Raiders, at the Browns, and home for the Chiefs. So in your mind, is that schedule as easy as DVOA is telling you? Is it about being home versus being on the road, or what are your thoughts?
No, because, when I do schedule, it's not accounting for home and road. So usually I mention home and road separately. Mm-hmm. But, the fact that, again, the next 2 weeks are really hard, right? At Atlanta, at Denver. So let's just look at the last 8 games.
Yeah.
So 5 of those are at home. So on top of the issue of the average DVOA of opponent, 5 of those games at home. Then I think when you read off those teams, you think of them as better than what they've actually been this year, right? Carolina, I'm sorry.
No, I know.
Is 24th in DVOA. Houston may be 4-2. They're 30th in DVOA. Okay? Oakland, 4-2, is 18th in DVOA.
I think that's the
right.
The key,
the hardest team to play in the division is Denver, and San Diego will be done with them in 2 weeks. So that's why the schedule is easier than you think, because those teams have not played as well as you think this year. Miami's played probably a little better than you think because they're 20th right now. But the other thing is that the way the schedules are packed in the ratings, the difficulty of the hardest schedules remaining is more extreme than the easiness of the easiest schedules remaining.
Okay, that's interesting.
So, Philadelphia and how hard their schedule is the rest of the way stands out a lot more than San Diego's being easy the rest of the way stands out. Philadelphia's average opponent the rest of the way is at 12.5%. San Diego's average opponent is at minus 4.7.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a much weaker, easiest schedule than the toughest schedule.
That all makes sense. And I think it's pretty clear, but do you agree that the AFC West is the best division in football at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
The AFC West is the best division in football, although, the NFC East...
Yeah.
NFC East is actually better by DVOA. The NFC East has Philly and Dallas at 4 and 5, Washington at 11, and the Giants at 17. I think that the subjectively, I think that Oakland is a little bit better than they've shown so far, and that Kansas City will get better, especially when Houston comes back. So subjectively, I think that the AFC West is the best division. But if you look at DVOA, the NFC East has been the best division this year.
That's a really great segue, Aaron, because we've actually spent some time talking about the Eagles, who at least at times, been the number one DVOA team this year, and talking about the Cowboys too. But I think we should next talk about the Washington Redskins, because they've been a pretty big surprise so far this season too, I think. They're 4-2, like you just mentioned. The playoff odds article mentioned that they're up to 45.8% chance to make the playoffs. That's way up from 2 weeks ago when they were just 19.2%. So I guess let's talk a little bit about how they've been successful and whether maybe they are for real and they can sort of hang in this thing with the Cowboys and Eagles, who at least are better in terms of DVOA overall. What are your thoughts first about Kirk Cousins? Obviously, he had that amazing second half last season, and I think that many of us were skeptical that he would be able to, produce along those same lines. Has he sort of lived up to the standard that he set? And I guess has he lived up to your own expectations for him, probably considering you thought he was going to perform a little bit worse?
Yeah, I think he's lived up to my expectations, because I think my expectations were a little higher than other people's. Because when you look at Kirk Cousins' 2014 season, it's not bad.
Yeah.
Right? Kirk Cousins started 5 games and played 6 in 2014. He had enough passes just over the minimum to be ranked in DVOA, and he was 14th with a 4.6% DVOA. That's not as good as he was last year when he was at 16.9% and ranked 6th.
Yeah.
But it is above average. And that's what he is this year. Right now, Kirk Cousins is 12th with 4.8% DVOA. So essentially, Kirk Cousins is not the quarterback he was last year, but he is the quarterback that he was in 2014, although with a slightly higher completion rate and slightly lower interception rate than he had in 2014, but those things are not as good as they were last year. So it's the step back from last year that we've been expecting, but it's not that he's not horrible. I think some people expected him to sort of turn into, Brock Osweiler.
Sure.
Or Gabbard or something, and that's not. I thought he would be average, but he's slightly above average, which is what he was 2 years ago. And the other thing about, this team is that they're getting a much better running game than last year. The defense is better than last year. The defense has been average, whereas last year it was bad. And they're getting really good special teams again.
I think that's the real key, though, Aaron, because I think people like me, frankly, that were more skeptical of Cousins, it was really the issue was Cousins was sort of the keystone piece of that offense, where if the rushing attack was so bad last year, if Cousins himself fell back to earth, then it seemed like everything would kind of fall apart for them. But you're right. They have been much more balanced. Their offensive line play has been great. Cousins has faced the 5th lowest pressure rate. And I think Matt Jones has been a real kind of a breakout player here. Last year, Alfred Morris had just 22 broken tackles all year. That's 212 total touches. Jones already has 18 this season on 97 touches. He's breaking a tackle basically twice as often as Alfred Morris, and that's helped result in the 4th best rushing DVOA. So this team, it really is balanced, and maybe they can hang in for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's a real surprise because I didn't expect this. Jones was not good when he played last year either. I think Morris had like the lowest rushing DVOA of any qualifying running back, and Jones was like 2nd lowest.
Yeah.
So it's not just that he's breaking tackles, he's seeing holes better, and he's making it through holes better, and the offensive line is blocking for him much better. So adjusted line yards, which is our stat that kind of tries to separate the back from the line, in 2013 through 2015, Washington was 23rd, 19th, and 21st. This year, they're 5th. And reading and hearing a lot of good things. I've not seen a lot of Washington games, to be honest, but reading and seeing a lot of things, great things about Brandon Scherf in his 2nd year, playing really well for them at right guard, which I guess goes to show you that if you want to draft a right guard in the top 10 picks and have that guy be awesome, you should draft a guy who you start at tackle and then switch to guard instead of taking a Jonathan Cooper or Chance Warmack. But it's not just Jones. Jones is playing better than last year. Jones is playing better than Morris, but the offensive line is also excelling. You talked about the pressure rate being low. The adjusted sack rate is also low. They're 7th in the league in adjusted sack rate on offense. So the offensive line is playing a big role in Washington's 4-2 record.
For sure. Now, the Eagles and Cowboys still do have the edge over them in DVOA. The Eagles are 4th and the Cowboys are 5th. But the head-to-head win for the Redskins over the Eagles, it does push them a little bit ahead. I think they're just a bit ahead of the Eagles in playoff percentage, still well behind the Cowboys. But again, this, like the AFC West, this NFC East is at least 3 teams deep, so it's pretty interesting.
And like the AFC West, I will say Philadelphia has slightly higher chances of winning the division than Washington does right now. But Washington has higher chance of making the playoffs overall. And I think a lot of that has to do with not necessarily the games against each other, but that whole Philly future schedule thing. Because Philly, that future schedule that they have is so tough. Washington's is tough too. Washington has the 4th hardest remaining schedule. But it's not like the Philly schedule is really remarkable if you look at it. I'm going to load it up here and just read it off to people, just how amazingly tough the remaining schedule is for the Eagles.
Okay.
They have Minnesota
Yikes.
and Dallas the next 2 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's 1 and 5 in DVOA. Then the Giants, Atlanta, and Seattle. So that's 4 of their next 5 games come against teams that are currently in the top 6 of DVOA. Then Green Bay, which is currently 8th. Then at Cincinnati, Washington, at Baltimore, and then they end with the Giants and Cowboys. So they play in the division where every team is at 0% DVOA or higher. And then their out-of-division games are like all the hardest teams in the league right now. Minnesota, Green Bay, Seattle, Atlanta. It's unbelievably difficult schedule.
Yeah, that's where you mentioned how the NFC has a lot of the better teams this year, how that's really impacting the Redskins' schedule.
And
that's
they're all
tough.
On the Eagles' schedule the rest of the way.
I mean, yeah, the Eagles. Wow, yeah, that's rough. Okay, I mean, we've had a good time talking about 2 really good divisions, the AFC West and the NFC East, but let's spend a little bit of time talking about our favorite punching bag division, the AFC South, where, maybe one team is starting to emerge a little bit as not too bad. The Tennessee Titans specifically, they're actually top 10 in both offensive and defensive DVOA. That might come as a surprise to people, but I'm wondering whether you think this team might actually be any good. What are your thoughts, Aaron?
Yes, the Tennessee Titans' new slogan, seriously, we actually don't suck.
That's a good slogan.
Do I think they're actually really good? No. In fact, I don't expect them to continue to play. They're 16th right now, 3% above average. I don't expect that to be as good the whole season. It's a subjective comment. I do not believe in this coaching staff. We've written about it. It was the point of the chapter. We've all talked about it. Follow Tom Gower's Twitter feed, follow Kian Fay's Twitter feed. Do not believe in this coaching staff. But the run game is clearly working. The defense is playing better than anyone expected. The special teams are horrible, but that's likely to get better because special teams are less consistent and a couple of bad special teams play can doom your special teams. Their punts, they've had problems punting, they've had problems with punt returns. The kickoffs and the field goals have been poor, but not that bad. The offense is very run-heavy, right? I mean, Tennessee is 16th in pass DVOA and 7th in run DVOA. So it's a very run-heavy offense, and it's working for them. It generally doesn't work in the NFL, but it's working for them. I mean, even with 16th and 7th, by the way, I'll point out that the actual rating for passing is 15.6, and the rushing rating is 3.0. So even though they're ranked better in running, they still are more efficient when passing, right? Because the DVOA splits for run and pass are based on all plays.
Yeah.
And the fact is passing is just more efficient than running. But by being so run-heavy, they obviously influence the way defenses play them, and that opens things up for the pass.
That's true. Mariota himself, at least his traditional statistics, don't really show much improvement compared to last year. Last year, he had a 62.2% completion percentage, 7.6 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. This year, a little bit down to 61.9% completions and 7.3 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. So he's not really looking that much better as a passer. Is that? I was going to ask you whether that looked better and maybe some of the other statistics that you guys have.
Yeah, DVOA has him better. Part of it is fewer fumbles, right? He has 3 fumbles in 6 games this year. Last year he had 10 in 12 games. The other is, he's taking fewer sacks, which is part him and part the line. But also, he's doing well on third downs. So Mariota is 25% below average on first down passing, but he's 14% above average on second, and he's 26% above average on third and fourth down. So and unlike a lot of young quarterbacks, he throws the ball downfield. His Alex on third down is 1.2 yards past the sticks. So that's why DVOA has him as average, has him at like minus 0.3% or something. Minus 0.6%, which is better. So according to DVOA, he's improved this year.
Yeah. And obviously he's making a big impact running. He's got 196 rushing yards himself. And DeMarco Murray's been excellent. Yards per carry is at 4.6, which is basically what it was with the Cowboys in 2014 when he had that huge year. Murray, in fact, has 26 broken tackles, which is tied for the fifth most in football. So that running attack is really working. You mentioned that their defense is good. Is this a team that can maybe follow that, what I'll call the Seahawks formula of like a run-heavy attack and then a defensive strategy there? Is that something they can ride through?
By the way, that the offensive line, like with Washington, the offensive line has improved.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
They were 20th in adjusted line yards last year and 17th the year before. This year, they're 6th. They were dead last in adjusted sack rate last year. This year, they are 3rd in adjusted sack rate. They've given up 9 sacks, but when you look at how many pass plays they've run, that actually works out to the 3rd best adjusted sack rate in the league. This team can follow that formula to win the AFC South, but only because it is the AFC South.
Graded on a curve, I guess, right?
Although I will point out one thing that is also similar to the Seattle formula, and that is one cornerback who excels at the top of the league. And I wonder if as the season is going on, people will notice there are a couple of cornerbacks having breakout years. One of them is Janoris Jenkins for the Giants. Another one for a while was Trumaine Johnson from the Rams, although his last game or two haven't been quite as good. But Jason McCourty for Tennessee, who I know Kean was really big on coming into this season, and Kean felt that a subjective reason that the Titans' defense would improve more than our numbers expected was getting McCourty back from injury. And Jason McCourty is number 1 in the league in success rate among qualifying cornerbacks through 6 games. He's 20th in yards allowed per pass, but number 1 with a 71% success rate this year. And he playing really well this week. He had 5 different tackles after receptions that still prevented a first down.
Wow.
They weren't all on third downs, but he's allowing completions of things in front of him and tackling before people go anywhere. And then on deep stuff, he's not allowing completions. So McCourty's having a really good year, and that's part of what's stoking the defense. And it's surprising. You wouldn't believe this, but there's 2 teams in the league that are top 10 in both offense and defense. One is Buffalo, and the other is Tennessee.
That's a pretty funny way to end the show.
Because when you're 10th in one and 9th in the other, that is still top 10 in both.
Hey, I mean, both teams are having some success, Buffalo especially. And if anybody wants to read about Buffalo, you touched on them in that ESPN article and also in the DVOA column on footballoutsiders.com. Really interesting stuff there.
I'll mention this, by the way, for people if you don't have Insider. And people should get Insider just because, just to give my Insider spiel, because I know people complain about the fact that we write for ESPN Insider. It's cheaper than it would cost if we charged for articles on Outsider, and you get a bunch of articles by other people too.
Yeah.
But for those who don't have it, let me point out that one of the questions about Buffalo has been, don't they seem to do this every couple of years?
Yeah.
Where they start hot and then just disintegrate? And the answer is yeah, but this team is better. This is the best Buffalo team through 6 weeks since 1993.
Wow. That was during their 4 straight.
That was during the 4 straight
FC,
Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Yes. So when we don't have playoff odds for 2008 when they started 5-1 and collapsed, but in 2011 when they started 4-2 and then collapsed, their playoff odds at this point were only like 60%, and this year they're like 75%. So this is a better team so far than the Buffalo teams that have collapsed in the past. And it's a better Tennessee team than we could have expected. The difference is Buffalo has good special teams, and Tennessee has horrible special teams, and Buffalo has to compete with the Patriots, and Tennessee does not have to compete with the Patriots.
Exactly, yeah. That's got to be fun doing that every year. But, I guess at some point Brady and Belichick will retire, and then maybe things will get a little bit easier. I think we got a little bit too sidetracked for me to make my Bené Benwickery joke about where he ranks among cornerbacks. So I guess we'll just
does Bené Benwickery rank?
So I guess we can just go ahead and call it a show. Aaron, thanks so much for joining me. I hope everyone enjoyed. I hope everyone is subscribing and checking out all of Aaron's articles. And we'll plan to talk to everyone again leading up to Week 8.